Welcome to Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. On today's show is Don and Debra Coes. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don and Debra, active members of the LDS Church, are parents of 5 children, 2 daughters and 3 sons. One of their sons, Marshall, passed away in 2016, and another son, Lincoln, is gay. They will share their family journey to love and accept their gay son, give advice for parents, local leaders, and LGBTQ people. The Coes are very involved in efforts to understand and prevent suicide of our LGBTQ family members, including testifying at the state legislature, and will share their learning, expertise, and advice. Don Coes authored an Ensign article published in June of 2017 about Elder Uchtdorf called The Faithful High Counselor. I encourage everyone to read that article. Debra Coes authored a recent article published in church-owned LDS Living called Preventing Youth Suicides in Our Wards and Families. It's a wonderful article. We'll talk more about that article in the podcast, and we will link to this article in the social media posts. The Coes also serve on the advisory board for our new Mormon LGBTQ resource center called Listen, Learn, and Love. Our first segment is just get to know the Coes. Don and Debra, how many years have you been married?
This is a question to see if you know.
We should always ask the women this question.
42.
That's great. And 42 years you've been married. Tell us where you raised your family. And maybe that's multiple places. Don, we're going to ask you this question.
Okay, so I joined the military, was commissioned as an officer in the Army not long after we were married. So we ended up spending 29 years moving all over the country and overseas. So we've lived in Maryland, Alabama, Washington State, Germany, Massachusetts, Kansas, and quite a few of those places more than once.
Well, that's great. Thank you for your service
Thank you.
in the military. And I understand where you connected with Elder Uchtdorf, and the source of this article that you wrote in the Ensign was when you both served in the same area.
Right. We were in a little branch. We were in the American Servicemen branch, and then we decided to start attending the local German branch in this town called Bad Kreuznach, and that's where we met the stake high counselor, who was Elder Uchtdorf before he had been called to be the stake president.
That is great. I love to go back in these leaders' lives and imagine what he was like as a high counselor. I thought you brought tremendous honor to him in the article that you wrote. Debra, tell us about your kids. You have 5 kids. Tell us about your kids and how many grandkids you have.
So we had 5 children, and the 2 oldest are girls. And then we had our son Marshall that passed away, and then our 2 youngest sons. So we've got the 3 boys and the 2 girls, and we have 4 grandchildren.
That's great. And where do you make your home now?
In Lehigh.
In Lehigh. And do you work, or do you both work?
So,
Much more than I want to.
So we own a real estate brokerage, and I'm the broker. So I'm a realtor, and Don's a retired colonel.
Good. Well, you make a great team, and it's been an honor to get to know you several years ago. One of the things that's unique about your family story is you became connected to LGBTQ issues in the community before you knew you had a son in your own family. Talk about how that happened. Do you want to start with that, Don?
You know, I was raised in Utah in the LDS Church and in West Valley. And the earliest I remember kind of coming to any kind of understanding of this, of LGBTQ issues, was when I was in the 9th grade.
Wow.
So this was the same year that Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the moon, 1969. So I'm in our library one day, walking down the aisle, and there's a book, and I pull it out and start looking at it, and it's a biography of Christine Jorgensen. And Christine Jorgensen was a man who was transgender. And eventually went to, I believe it was Denmark, and had a sex reassignment surgery and lived the rest of her life as a woman. So you can imagine, as a 15-year-old, finding this book in the library, and I was just fascinated by it. I thought this was so great that science, that modern medicine could fix a mistake of nature. That was my reaction. I wasn't, grossed out by it. I didn't think it was weird or strange. So, I mean, that was kind of the first thing. Then, I went on an LDS mission to Germany, came back, went to the University of Utah, got involved in ROTC, the Army ROTC, and graduated and was commissioned in the Army and went off to my Army career. So in the Army, I started meeting people who were most likely gay. And it was, different because at the base level, they were just soldiers. And it got me thinking about things. So, I remember in the late 80s, about 1987, there was a woman that worked with me, and she was most, likely gay. But of course, we couldn't talk about it because that would get you discharged from the military for being gay. And so, again, I kind of confronted this issue and said, what does it matter what a person's orientation is if they can do their job? If they can do their job, they're a good soldier, why should it matter to me what their orientation was? So then, eventually I retired from the Army in 2007. We moved back to Utah. And I thought several times that I wanted to get involved in the LGBT community.
Wow, that's really unusual.
And but I had no dog in the fight, There was really nothing motivating me, and I would see something online, and then it would pass me by. The event would come and go, and I hadn't done anything. So in 2014, my father passed away. We had about a week's notice before he died. And as he, during that week, I very distinctly, looking at my dad, said, that's going to be me in 30 years or less. And what will I regret not having done when I'm the one who's lying there dying? And my answer was, I will regret if I don't get involved in making things better for gay people. So that was in April. Again, I saw something online about Affirmation. And Affirmation is a LDS-centric group of LGBT people and allies. And I had seen things about Affirmation before, but again, I'd just never taken that final step to actually get involved. But this time, with the recent passing of my father, I did. And so in going online, I saw that they had a conference scheduled for Salt Lake City in September of 2014. And so I, looked at the site and thought about that. And they said that they needed people to volunteer to usher at the conference. And I said, I can do that. I can show people where the room is. And I don't have to attend the conference. I don't have to, show my support or anything like that. I just will usher. So I went up to this conference, and I showed up. I did my 4 hours. I did end up speaking with a lot of people. After people got into their classes and things kind of died down, I would slip into the back of the room and listen. And I think within about 20 minutes, I had a big change in, how I saw things. And I said, wow, I have been lied to my whole life about gay people. right? I've been told that they were sinful, that this was a choice, that they hated God, that they just wanted to do evil, and all of this stuff. And I was told that by my society, by my religion, and by my profession. They were all homophobic. And as a result, I was homophobic. I think I was more mildly homophobic than most people, but I was homophobic. And so this was a huge change. So within a few weeks, I came back and I talked to Debra about it, and I said, we really need to get involved in this. And so, another month or so goes by without us doing anything. And I finally said, well, I'm going to contact this woman that I met up there. And then the next day we met this woman for lunch and talked to her, and she told us that PFLAG, which is an organization that used to stand for Parents, Friends, and Families of Gays and Lesbians, that they were organizing or reorganizing the chapter in Provo. So I went there. There was a group called LDS Family Fellowship. I started attending that. There was a group of BYU students called Understanding Same Gender Attraction at BYU, USGA. There's another group at UVU called Spectrum. So we started showing up, and that's how we got involved.
That's a great story. I love just the journey there, Dawn, and thank you for sharing that. Debra, tell us more of your journey.
Our journeys were actually rather different. Dawn was the one that was first saying we really need to reach out to this community. And I don't even remember which one of my friends, somebody I was friends with on Facebook, posted something about the issue with suicidal ideation with people that were LGBT. And I don't want to paint people that are LGBT as just all suicidal, but there's a lot of things that we do and say that when you understand what causes suicidal ideation, that we actually do things that make it very difficult for them. And when I read that, and it turned out that one of our neighbors that I at the time actually didn't know, that their son had died by suicide and had left a very clear note and message as to why he had done it. And it had a lot to do with the way we talk about people that are LGBT in our society and in our church congregations, unnecessarily so. And when I read that really pulled at my heartstrings, because I thought, oh my gosh, if I can help with that, if I can help another parent by just making sure that they knew that they were loved and wanted. And so that was more my motivation. And I have to honestly say, I probably wouldn't have even had thought in that direction had Don not been so strongly saying that he felt like this was what we needed to do.
Tell us more about, so you're connecting with LGBTQ, sort of two different paths to the same cause. Those are beautiful stories. And tell us about Lincoln. So tell us about you're connecting with LGBTQ and ministering this area, and you're completely unaware that you have an LGBTQ member in your own family.
Totally unaware. It never once even occurred to us.
So tell us about Lincoln.
So Lincoln was...
he's the baby.
He's the baby of the family.
He's the tallest.
And he was just a great, great teenager. We used to call him Mr. G-rated because he was so careful about his viewing habits and the things that he did. Just was very, very kind. He often cooked dinner. He used to get upset when everybody didn't help in the kitchen with cooking dinner and doing the dishes, more because he felt like that shouldn't be, just my job. I remember him being concerned about that. Just very thoughtful of everybody, tried to do everything the right way at church and be a great kid. The only thing that did surprise me, sometimes you kind of look back. He did sometimes isolate himself a little more and play computer games and stuff. And another thing that he did when it came time to go on a mission, without any word, he'd always been very strong in the church and not a hint of any problem. And when it came time to go on a mission, he said, I don't want to go. He said, I'm not sure if it's true, and I refuse to talk about it. And he, I was like, just help me understand. He was like, no, I will not talk about it.
So when he was missionary age, he hurt his wrist, and that took several months to heal. And in fact, they told us there was something, wrong with his bones that they had discovered, and they finally got that squared away. And then he injured his foot, and so these were reasons that we, were unconcerned really about him not going, because he had these physical issues. In addition to saying that he wasn't sure he wanted to go, but it was just natural to not be concerned about that because he had these physical issues as well. So when he finally did go, he was all excited and went, and he served in 2 cities, and then he was called to be what I call a special assistant to the president. I know that's not a title, but he was working in the office and doing a lot of technical work for the mission. And Lincoln is a very take charge kind of guy. And he loves to run things, and he loves to make things happen,
And he's
to
super organized and very detail oriented.
spend people's money, and he just will take over. And so I think that this was part of the conversation that the mission president had. So I think it was still his first city, he stepped on his foot wrong and re-injured his ankle, and but kept on, trucking. And so I don't know if his injury is what helped lead him to be called to into the mission home, or if it was the desperation for somebody with technical skills. But at any rate, he ended up in the mission home.
And he comes out to the mission president, if I understand. That's one of the very first people, unless it's a mission companion or a fellow missionary, comes out to the mission president. Talk about that, one of you.
So his companion had already come out as gay, and the mission president knew that before Lincoln was even the companion. And the mission president
So a missionary felt comfortable coming out to the mission president, and other missionaries became aware this missionary was gay.
Right, and other missionaries had come out to the mission president, and he'd seen the mission president treat them just very kind and very loving, and still seeing all the good in those missionaries and encouraging them.
He didn't send them home.
They weren't sent
No.
home. They weren't shamed. And
Yeah,
Good.
and just very, very.
And this is like 2012, so it's only 5 years ago-ish,
Right.
or 6 years ago. Okay.
But his mission president, one of the things I'm really grateful for the mission president is he gave Lincoln, when Lincoln was coming home, first of all, he called me on the phone.
Yeah, so just to fill in just a little bit, so he, with this re-injury of his foot, and he was in a walking cast for months, and he was finally evaluated by a podiatrist or an orthopedic surgeon or whatever, and said he has got to go home. And his mission president called us. We were actually up in Yellowstone. He called us on the phone and said, hey, Lincoln's been ordered home by the church, but I don't have anybody that can replace him. So can I keep him for another month? And, we said, hey,
What
whatever.
a compliment to Lincoln.
Yeah. And we said, whatever, Lincoln wants to do, and we're fine with that. But, so.
But that's when he said what a fine missionary Lincoln was. And by this time, I believe he knew that Lincoln was gay.
Oh, yeah.
And knowing that his mother was who he was the most concerned about telling. he went out of his way to tell me what a great missionary Lincoln was. And he really was a great missionary, hence the reason they wanted to keep him another month. And even after Lincoln came home, there were several phone calls, and Lincoln would help him
He was
over
still
the
on his
phone.
mission.
Yeah, he still helped him.
And his
when
mission president called him and said, "Lincoln, I need you to fix my iPad." And he did so remotely.
But when he said, "He is really this fantastic, what a wonderful son you have," and I just responded like, "Well, yeah, I know he was a great son." And he stopped and he said, "Really, he is a wonderful, wonderful missionary. He's a wonderful young man. He's one of the finest I've seen."
Hint, hint, he's gay.
Yeah. but but I think that he was sincere in telling me that, but I think he was also trying to prepare me that I would remember that when Lincoln also told me
When the time came.
Yeah, knowing that would happen. And what I understand from Lincoln now is that he gave him a blessing at the time and told him in the blessing not to be afraid to tell his mother that his mother would become his biggest ally. And I had no idea until well after I was testifying at the state legislature and
This is a beautiful
and
story.
very involved. It was much later that Lincoln told us that story. So I think that in many ways, I think that we can be guided as to what are the best things to do. Just like Dawn feeling so strongly that it was important that we reach out to we mostly have reached out to the LDS LGBT community, the LDS with an LDS background, just because we have that same background and we're in Utah. And my feeling strongly about helping prevent suicide and recognizing that. And I think that there's a lot of things.
When did Lincoln come out to you two?
So a year after he got home is when we became involved. And we immediately began talking to our children about what we were learning. As I mentioned before, that, I just felt like everything I had been told about LGBT people was wrong. And so we're talking to all of our kids. So by this time, Lincoln had come out to his brother, who was serving a mission at the same time he was, and had told him at the time. He was very close. This is his next older brother, and he was close to him. And then he came out to our oldest daughter, and our oldest daughter and son-in-law have left the church. And so he felt that they were safe to come out too. And so they're now trying to figure out who told mom and dad that Lincoln was gay because he said they're acting crazy. Because we really kind of jumped in pretty quickly and we're pretty involved and getting involved and we're learning all these things and we're telling all of our kids, hey, you could become involved in these groups too. You don't have to be gay to become an ally. So on Thanksgiving night, Lincoln did manage to stay around for longer than 30 minutes. And eventually about 10 o'clock at night or maybe even later after everybody had gone to bed and Lincoln was still there, and we kept saying, don't you want to stay here? You can go sleep in this room. And he said, hey, can I talk to you? So we went into our office. And he started into this about a 3-minute spiel that I could tell was leading up to something. And so as I sat there, I said to myself, wow, this kind of sounds like a coming out story that I've heard people tell about, LGBT people tell about. But I said, Lincoln's not gay, so what else could it be? So as he's proceeding with this kind of build up about, you're supporting me and all this stuff, I went through kind of the possibilities. And so I came up with these 4 possibilities that, one was that he had a girlfriend and she was pregnant. And one was that he was going to leave the church. And one was that he was going to drop out of college. And the least important thing, I thought, was that, he's going to tell us he's gay. But again, I just couldn't. I just couldn't.
My
imagine
mind
it.
didn't even go there. It never even once occurred to
Oh,
me.
but it sounded so much like other coming out stories we'd heard.
That's
But I remember him saying, I can't believe you're supporting me and you don't even know that I'm gay. And I was so surprised. And you could tell that he'd thought about this for a long time and was concerned about, our reaction, and was trying to say, let me help you understand this just a little bit, and telling us different things. And I remember he looked calm on the outside, but I went in and hugged him, and you could feel the trembling. And then I realized how much I had probably hurt him growing up and made him afraid to say this. And all of a sudden it made sense why he didn't like being around our family when we were having family dinner. There was one time I remember we were talking, I don't even remember what the conversation was about, but in the middle of dinner, he got up and said, I need to leave right now. And I'm sure we made some comments. And that was kind of a difficult moment for me to realize that I would never have hurt him intentionally, and that we need to be very careful and be mindful that it could be our child, it could be, another relative or somebody that we know or a friend of theirs, and we need to be very careful how we talk about people and frame people, and remember that all children, all of them are children of God.
I'm just so touched by this story. That's a beautiful story as he's coming out to you, two allies, but still there's great pain. Even in the ideal situation, he's coming out to LDS parents that have sort of are proven allies. They're unsuspecting their own son's gay, and he comes out, but he's still trembling.
Yeah.
Because of just all the history that he's felt, either innocently in your family or in society or in other areas, and now to sort of come out with his parents, I assume that was a very healing moment for him. It was very surprising for you. It's interesting. I've never really heard that part of the story. Sounds like, and I think it's good for LDS parents to hear your story, that there was no suspecting, there was no, I kind of known for a while. This was completely different, and I think everybody's story is different, but I think it's wonderful for LDS parents to hear, and for all of our leaders and LDS parents and everybody to assume that there are gay ears around us, and so we need to be very careful of the things that we say. Talk about Lincoln, because I want to talk about, he eventually finds Robert, and they are married in 2017. And one of the unique parts of this story is your ward and stake support of this same-sex marriage that's occurring in your home. Kind of walk us through some of that story.
So about the time of the Supreme Court ruling, our son is still not out publicly. He is to his family, but not to, and some friends, but not out publicly. And so this is about June of 2015, and I am kind of champing at the bit to, I would rather that he was out, because to me it's no big deal, and it's healthier to be out. And so we made an appointment with our bishop and went and talked to him and said, look, we're LGBTQ allies, and we support gay marriage. So that's what we did.
That's not exactly how it happened, but in my but
And
but we
and
went
he
and
was
talked to them, and we talked to them about the fact that we reached out to the LGBT students at BYU, and we talked about some of their experiences and the need to do better. We also talked about, the way I remember it, we also talked about that the Supreme Court ruling, it had already been argued at that point, and that the ruling was going to happen.
Yeah.
And no matter which way they ruled, there was going to be negative talk. And then after the policy came out, there were so many people that we knew, good members of the church, that was just very, very difficult for. And it was difficult just to try and say, how can we still be kind? I was very afraid for how people would react to that policy and make an assumption that being unkind was okay, because it still wasn't okay. And just seeing the reaction of some people, the stake president actually wrote and said, I'm happy to meet with you if you want. And so Don was at our cabin with several LGBT college students from the area, and I was still back at the house. So I went ahead and made an appointment with the stake president and talked to him. And I wasn't that nice. I mean, I was just upset, and I wasn't trying to criticize the church as much as I was trying to say, let me help you understand these stories. These are people, and even people that are active members of the church doing their best to do what's right. They have been very hurt by this. And let me tell you some of the things that have been said, because we had things said to us that was just shocking and didn't go with our gospel. And I shared some of that, and I shared some of it kind of in an upset way. And he said, I'm not the enemy. I'm here to help. Please, let's see what we can do to make our stake better. And then I went home and thought about that and wrote him a letter back and said, you're right. I'm sorry that I was upset. I will try not to be upset. And that was when he wrote a letter back and he said, I didn't realize all that you guys were dealing with. Let's start meeting regularly. He said, you're dealing with things my bishops don't deal with. And I meet with my bishops regularly. So let's start meeting and help me understand, because particularly one of the biggest things we do is reach out to the LGBT students.
You're this
at BYU.
window for him into this issue.
Yeah.
That's now affecting a broader membership of the stake.
Right. And he doesn't know still that we have a gay son. We did.
At that time.
Yeah, at that time he didn't. But he started to meet with us and say, help me understand. Because I think from a standpoint from a BYU student that has ecclesiastical endorsement, that is a very different thing for people to realize, because we don't realize that these are people that do love God, and they, like in the case of our son, they don't necessarily leave because they hate God. It's because we say things and do things that make it very uncomfortable for them to continue to worship with us. And that was when he started to meet with us, and that was when that poor man, he was so nice. I don't even know how many hundreds of pages he read of emails from us, because he also said, send me emails. He wanted to understand, and he was fabulous in how he handled that.
This is a beautiful story of both of you, of all three of you being willing to engage on this topic, and it took effort on all three of your part to do that. So I look at all three of you as heroes, and you're all coming from a different standpoint, and you both have different feelings about this, but I think you're both complimenting the stake president, being willing to learn outside of just sort of the normal authorized channel of learning, right, and realizing that you had knowledge that would be helpful to him and his ministry, and being humble enough to recognize that at times that can come from multiple sources to help a leader, whether it's a therapist or a ward member, to help him be better, and the humility that took, and your willingness to stay engaged on this topic, even though it was generating pain for you personally and in your family, that you were willing to stay engaged. And I have to think that, that's a success story, and it's led to some beautiful things I want to talk about when Lincoln ended up stepping away from the church and finding Robert and deciding to be married to Robert. So let's want to transition to, you're talking to the stake president, the bishop, and at some point Lincoln comes out and that becomes part of the conversation. But Lincoln eventually finds Robert, and your ward and stake leaders become aware that they're getting married. So talk about that.
He started dating Robert and brought him home for dinner. This was right after the policy that happened.
So in like November of 2015.
Yeah, later in the month. And we just were as supportive as we could be, just telling him, making sure he knew that we were going to love him no matter what, that it didn't matter. We weren't going to even be concerned about anything other than the unity of our family. And in I think it was the first Sunday in April, so about 6 months, not quite 6 months later, he'd been seeing Robert some and would occasionally bring him over for dinner. And it took us quite by surprise. He announced his engagement
Wow.
at a family dinner. And we told him congratulations. And Marshall, though, and stormed out of the room. He was quite upset. He was okay being loving and supporting his brother and making sure that his brother knew that he was welcome in the family. But the gay marriage was a little much for him. And I think it's really important that people understand Marshall's only hope. Marshall had really, at this point, he had had about 10 very miserable years of life. And his only hope for, really everything, there wasn't a lot of hope for him in this life. It was the next life. And so for him, he wasn't sure what that was going to look like if he in any way showed any being kind to his brother and his fiance. And so he didn't know what to do, and he stormed out of the room, and it was a little difficult there and a little tense. And I got up and went and started talking to Marshall. So we were happy because I think it's important that Lincoln also be happy and mentally healthy. But we also didn't want this to cause a rift in our family, because I think that families are so important. I think that is absolutely critical. So that was a little bit of a difficult thing. We asked Lincoln at that time to wait a little bit to put it public on Facebook. He was going to put it public on Facebook. And I said, our stake president has been so kind, and I think that it would only be fair for us to tell him and not have him hear about it on the grapevine. And so he did. He was respectful and waited to announce it publicly, and we made an appointment with the stake president at that point to go so that he would be prepared. He didn't even know we had a gay son, and we wanted him to be prepared so that he would. Sometimes we all react better if we have a little bit of time to
That's thoughtful.
decide. Yeah.
So Lincoln comes out at the family dinner to announce that he's getting engaged to Robert. Marshall's uncomfortable at that and needs to take some time. You proactively meet with the stake president, let the stake president know what's going down, which is very thoughtful. So tell us about this time when Marshall and Lincoln had this last encounter before Marshall passed away.
So up until that point, Marshall's been friendly to Robert, but when Lincoln and Robert would go to leave, he would hug Lincoln and hardly really acknowledge Robert very much. And then this was our final situation where he kind of stormed out of the room. And I wasn't quite sure what to do, to help Marshall. I tried to help him. We met with our stake president, and I'll talk about that in a second. Our daughter, our second oldest daughter, who's also very active in the church and a temple worker, she talked to her bishop, and both her bishop and our stake president, their greatest concern, and this, I was so grateful for this, their greatest concern was keeping our family unity and us communicating to our son that we loved him and that we were going to keep the love and the unity of our family was going to be paramount for us. And that our stake president and this bishop supported that. And even without knowing that that's how we felt, that was their message. Our stake president, the very first thing he said was, I want to communicate to your son, I want to send the message that he is going to be welcome in his home ward anytime he and his husband want to join us for worship services. And he said that was his goal. And he said, it is really important, whether you're giving a talk or whether it's Christmas or Easter or whatever the occasion, that he know he's welcome. And he said, your son that got married in the temple recently, he said he knows he's welcome anytime. But your other son doesn't know that he's welcome, and that's an important thing for him to know, that he's always going to be welcome. Because he said, if we can't be Christ-like to him now, how do we ever expect him to want to even look at the gospel again? And I thought that that was a really important point. I went home and told Marshall what he had said, and our daughter Charity told Marshall what her bishop had said, and what her bishop said was very similar. And Marshall still just really didn't know what to do with that. He still struggled. So about a month later was my birthday. And so our family was gathered for the birthday. And Marshall still was really struggling. And even though we had talked to him, he was still really struggling. And we had had stake conference that day. And our stake president, knowing that this was going to be public, it still wasn't public, but knowing that it was going to be, he gave a talk, and he barely mentioned this, but his whole talk was on reaching out to people, reaching out and loving people, and loving everybody, and what would be difficult situations that a family would face, that they would need people to reach out. And then he talked about how to reach out. It was a very detailed talk. It was really good. And one of the things that he mentioned in this talk about when would somebody need someone to reach out, and then what were things that you could do, he gave a whole list. Somebody that had cancer, somebody that just had a death in the family, and he named several situations. And one of them that he said is a family whose son was gay and just announced his engagement. And I know that he did that just for us, which I thought was really nice, that he was sending a message, reach out to this family when this happens. And I was very appreciative. And at the end of stake conference, I went up and thanked him. And we had a visiting general authority at the time. And the visiting general authority also gave a really good talk. He talked about when somebody is a little bit different, and he used an example, he used an analogy of how chickens are. And it was kind of comical the way he worded things, and he did it as kind of a light and funny talk, but still he addressed in a very good way that when somebody is a little bit different, we can tend to be kind of cruel. And he literally said in the middle of this talk, he said, I don't know all of what is going to determine if we make the celestial kingdom or not, but I can tell you, if we are not kind, we will not be in there. That is going to be something that we all need to be kind. So when I went up and thanked the stake president for just even that brief mention and helping people understand to reach out to us and not shun us, I said, wow, the visiting general authority gave a really good talk too. And he said, please go thank him yourself. He said, I've talked to him some about this. He said that wasn't by complete accident. So I went and I waited until everybody else, because he had a long line wanting to shake his hand, and I waited for everybody else to be done. And then I went and shook his hand and I said, we're the ones with a gay son that just got engaged, that the stake president mentioned, and I really appreciated what you said. And he then pulled me aside and he said, you know, we're trying to do better on helping people understand the whole gospel on this. And he went into great detail for just a few minutes about the need for people to just behave differently. And it was just a very, very kind thing for him to take that few minutes. Well, I went home and I pulled our son aside, Marshall, and I said, I want to share what was said in stake conference. And he and I talked, and then a little bit later, everybody came because it was my birthday. And when everybody came over for my birthday, Marshall still kind of kept his distance from Lincoln and Robert. I mean, he was very nice to Lincoln, but still kept his distance from Robert. And I guess that he thought about it over the next week, because the next Sunday was Mother's Day. And again, Lincoln and Robert came over, as did all of our kids, for Mother's Day. And we were eating dinner, and Lincoln and Robert had to leave a little bit early to go then to Robert's family. And when Lincoln and Robert got up from the dinner table to leave a little bit early, they went out to the car. And just as they were getting in the car, Marshall jumped up and ran out the front door and said, "Wait a minute, Robert can't leave because my new little brother didn't give me a hug." And that was the first that Marshall had given him a hug or really acknowledged him very much. And that moment that he hugged Robert and made it clear that he was going to keep that unity in our family and go ahead and treat him like a member of the family was literally the last moment they saw Marshall alive. Because he died exactly 1 week later, quite unexpectedly. Even though he'd been ill, we had no idea that he was going to die anytime soon. And so that was so important that our stake president had done that, and that general authority gave the talk that he did, and that he took the few minutes to talk to me about that and talk to me about that importance of the unity of our family, and that I was able to share that with Marshall, because then Marshall understood what was the right thing to do. I think it wasn't that he didn't want to do the right thing. It wasn't that he didn't like Robert, but he wanted so desperately to make sure that what he did was right. And so that's what happened.
Well, I have tears in my eyes, Debra and Don, as you share that story and Marshall's last interaction with Lincoln and Robert, and then Marshall passing away. When you told me that the first time, I'll never forget that story. And I have to think that I went to Marshall when you first told me that story, and the peace that he feels on the other side, knowing that his last encounter with his family was bringing them all together and loving them. And I sometimes think we forget about people on the other side, and that they may still have emotions and feelings and regret of how they may or may not have handled things. And I thought, what a blessing it is for Marshall to know that that sweet experience happened, and there's great love with Robert and Lincoln and Marshall and your whole family. And what a credit it is to both you and Don, and for your stake leaders. And I have to think how much you being willing to engage your stake leaders, and you're both coming up from a little different angle. I think that's okay. You know, I think that's good for our leaders to kind of hear people coming from a different, even though, you know, I think it's helpful, and I think you've done a really good job, and I have to think you've helped them be better leaders, and it's significantly improved the stake experience for your members. Now, I want to go back to this marriage that Lincoln and Robert are working towards, and talk about how the ward and the stake chose to rally around and support this marriage, just like any other marriage that occurred in the stake.
So I think that from the beginning, when we knew that Robert and Lincoln were going to marry, my desire was that it be no different than any other marriage in an LDS ward, right? That we would invite the whole ward, basically.
You know, whenever somebody in the ward marries, even if it's not a temple marriage, I've certainly been to plenty of marriages where the bride's been pregnant, but you go because those are your friends. That's a girl that I might have known growing up, or knew her in Young Women's, or whatever the case may be. Been friends with the parents. Yeah, we still go, and we show love, and we didn't see that our son's wedding should be any different.
And so I said, you know, Debra and I were having this conversation. As I recall, you said, yeah, you weren't sure that you wanted to do that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, because I honestly didn't think that I was going to survive. To me, I just saw this as one huge shame storm And I wasn't sure I was going to survive. I wasn't sure how the ward was going to react. My initial reaction when I went in to talk to the stake president and tell him that our son was engaged, one of the things that I said was, I don't know that I want to keep going here to church. I said, right now it feels like a really good idea to go somewhere else, because I didn't know how people were going to react. I mean, it would have been one thing if they had known that he was gay and they could kind of adjust to the idea, but he announced that he was gay by announcing his engagement, and I was just very concerned with how people were going to react. And that I don't mean that in a way that in a negative way. I just know that I might not have reacted that way, because again, I think lots of people are great people. They just need a little help sometimes in knowing, what's the right thing to do. And this was something that I didn't know.
So sitting around the table talking with Robert and Lincoln and Debra and I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to invite everybody in the ward. And Debra said, yeah, she didn't know about that. And she said some stuff. And we looked at Lincoln and he said, yep, sounds good to me. So that's what we decided to do, that we would send out invitations to everybody and handle it just like we did when our other son got married about a year before that.
And from the beginning, our stake president said that that's what we should do, that it was just showing love to people, that Lincoln needed to know he was just as welcome to come to church as somebody else. And I think that we forget that we say that, everybody's welcome.
So they got married and had the reception, and we invited everybody in the ward, and also the stake presidency, and also people in the LGBTQ community. And I have to admit that I kept a mental list of people who came, because I wanted to kind of compare that to a straight wedding. And I went home and marked off on my ward roster. And so we had about 50 people from our ward come, which I would say was probably about, average of other weddings that we'd been to. Some were a little more because maybe the kids were more recently in the ward or something. But the bottom line is that a lot of members of the ward came. Most of them were high priests, because I'm a high priest. And our stake president came, and the counselor came. Our counselor and his wife were in Portland, Oregon, and drove all the way back that day to be to the reception that night, because they said they didn't want to miss that. And they're also our neighbors, and we've known them for a long time. The stake president came. The former stake president came. He was also a former mission president. Another former mission president came. So we had a very good representation from our ward and from other LDS people who came to the reception. And I'm sure if you asked them, almost all of them would say no, they thought that gay marriage was wrong and all that stuff. But they came to show their support, and we really appreciated that.
Well, and one of the reasons at the end of the day, I mean, I was very nervous of how that was going to go. I didn't know how it was going to go, inviting everybody. And I think that it speaks very well for our ward and stake that they understood that we were trying to show that we loved our son and that we wanted to communicate love to him, and that they were willing to come and communicate that same thing, that they wanted to communicate that love. And there were some people that came that really surprised me, because I knew how they felt about gay marriage, and yet they understood the importance of coming and showing that love and making sure that Lincoln knew that, yes, it really was true, that any time he wanted to come, that he was going to be welcomed in our ward.
But I think it's also, worth noting that a lot of these people have gay brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, grandkids, and stuff, but they're not out, right? The people aren't out as having gay LGBT family members. And so I think a lot of them long for it to be acceptable in society, and they, without announcing that they have LGBT relatives, came to show their support because this needs to be something that is more normalized so that people don't feel, frankly, there's a lot of just shame and guilt and all that associated with it.
Now, this is just a beautiful story of practicing the principle of love. It's the great commandment in our church, and this is just a love story. There's beauty, there's pain, there's difficulty, there's Marshall's passing in the middle of this story. There's a unique life mission here and a life family story, but it's a love story. And it's a love story based on the doctrine of our church and bringing everybody together to understand and support. And everybody that came to this wonderful gay wedding was practicing the principle that's part of the doctrine of our church, is to love and to show kindness and respect and empathy for people. And so it's a wonderful story, and I'm glad it's being shared on this podcast, because I think one of your points is, Debra, is that people want to do the right thing, and so they need, at times, church leaders to help them to know what the right thing is.
Yep.
And you've had a stake president, a general authority, and a bishopric, it sounds like, that have given members permission to do the right thing and know they're not crossing a line that they would naturally, certainly what I felt is that would be to be kind to everybody. Now, I want to close with this article written in LDS Living that you authored, Debra. It's dated March 31st, 2018, so it's recent. It's titled Preventing Youth Suicide in Our Wards and Families, and it's a really comprehensive, wonderful article, and I encourage all our listeners to read it. But would you like to share just a few points from the article, few key points?
So, as I said earlier in the podcast, for me, all of this was about suicide prevention from the beginning. I was very concerned about that, especially with our experiences with Marshall. And one of the things that I knew with Marshall was that connection. He needed that connection with our family. He needed to not just be in his bedroom suffering. He needed to know that we were there and wanted him. And I read a lot of Brene Brown during the time. She had just written her first book, and I started reading more and more of what she said. And a lot of what she said made a lot of sense to me, because she talked about how important connection is, that this is not something that some people need more than others. This is something that as human beings, she says, we're hardwired for connection, and how important that is. I've since read a book that I think is outstanding, and it talks about the same thing. It's called Why People Die by Suicide. It was published by Harvard and written by one of the top experts in the nation. And he talks about the same thing, that one of the things the two biggest things that bring people to suicidal ideation and wanting to die by suicide are not feeling that valued or feeling that they're a burden, and also not feeling like they belong. So this is super important. I got to find this one quote by Brene Brown. Also, the CDC came to Utah.
Centers for Disease Control.
Yeah, the Centers for Disease Control came to Utah recently to try and figure out why we've had this huge rise in youth suicides. And connection was one of the biggest things that they also said. But Brene Brown said, connection is why we are here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Belonging is in our DNA. It's an irreducible need, just like love. We are biologically, cognitively, physically, and spiritually wired to love, to be loved, and to belong. These are needs. When those needs are not met, we don't function as we were meant to. We break, we fall apart, we numb, we ache, we hurt others, we get sick. We are profoundly social creatures. At the root of our desires is the need to belong, to be accepted, to connect with others, to be loved. A sense of social connection is one of the fundamental human needs. And she talks also about that when we don't feel connected, when we don't feel like we belong, and this can be in our families, in our communities, in our church, all of the places that are protective factors are protective factors for against people being suicidal because of those connections, because of those relationships. And when people feel disconnected, they will almost do anything to escape that. It's such a painful thing emotionally that that is really a critical factor. And when you think about what Christ talked about, he talks about leaving the 90 and 9. That's because the 90 and 9 are connected. But the one lost sheep out in the wilderness, they will literally die overnight. They will not survive. And the people that aren't connected, we need to go after them and help them feel that connection. That doesn't mean that we have to have any agreement on anything, just like Christ reached out to the Samaritans. And they and the Jews have been longtime enemies, and yet he still understood the importance of that human connection was so critical.
That really rings true to me from my experience as a YSA bishop, the need for connection, and how in our Mormon communities, and in our Mormon, I think that there's a great need for connection, and to feel not part of that community, the pain that creates is really, really difficult for our youth and anybody that's LGBTQ. So it helps me understand the backstory better of why suicide is something that LGBTQ people, LDS LGBTQ people, are thinking about and considering, and how we need to do better, just like you and your stake have done better. Other thoughts from what you've shared, what you've written?
One of the other quotes that I really like from Brene Brown is she says, the most terrifying and destructive feeling that a person can experience is not the same as being alone. It is a feeling that one is locked out of the possibility of human connection and being powerless to change the situation. In the extreme, psychological isolation can lead us to a sense of hopelessness and desperation. People will do almost anything to escape the combination of condemned isolation and powerlessness. And I think that that's absolutely true, and I think that that's why it's so critical that we reach out. We don't have to agree on anything to be kind. Our families really are the strength of society, and it doesn't matter that we see things differently religiously. It doesn't matter that we're at different places in our lives. That connection and that family still needs to be paramount.
I think one
I
thing.
love that. Go ahead, Don, and let's just finish up with some closing comments. Don, what would you leave as some closing comments for our listeners?
So between the time that we got involved as allies and the time our son came out, we met quite a number of LGBT people. And unfortunately, we met people who were emotionally and spiritually devastated by the reaction of their families and loved ones. And so that helped to reinforce to us, when we found out our own son was gay, that we would never exhibit any kind of reaction to him that would lead him to that kind of feeling. And I think that's it was such a powerful example to us of people who were supported by their parents and their loved ones versus people who weren't. And so there was never any thought in our minds that we wanted our son to feel anything but our complete love for him, and the fact that nothing would ever come between our love for him and our reaction to his situation.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Debra, some final thoughts.
I also want to kind of bring in any difficulties, whether it's with jobs or whether it's with school or whether it's with drugs, whatever the situation is, our kids all need to know that we are going to love them and help them through any difficulty, that we are family and that we are there for each other, that nothing is going to break that circle of our love, And I think that that's a message we need to send to all of our youth, no matter what the struggle is, no matter what the difficulty is. They need to know that they can come to us, that they can come to their ward families, that they can go to their leaders of all kinds, to their parents, to their siblings, to their aunts and uncles, and we're going to be there for them, and we're going to help them. And I think that's the most important message that we can give.
Thank you. I encourage all the listeners to look at this article that Debra co-wrote. It's in LDS Living. It'll be linked on the podcast and our social media posts. And on behalf of all of our listeners, Don and Debra, thank you for sharing your life journey with us in this beautiful story of keeping your family close together, loving and accepting LGBTQ people, helping parents and LDS leaders and all of us do better. Thank you for the wonderful work you're doing and will continue to do. And we'll sign off. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.